Hi guys, and welcome to the Stephen King Cemetery Club. Hi guys, we are at the final discussion of Salem's Lot. We are on part 3, which is called The Deserted Village, and one of the things in here is an excerpt from the Edgar Allan Poe poem, The Haunted Palace. And travelers now within that valley through the red litten windows see vast forms that move fantastically to a discordant melody, while like a rapid, ghastly river through the pale door, a hideous throng rush out forever and laugh, but smile no more. I really like that poem about insanity. So we move on to chapter 14, which is The Lot 4. And we have an excerpt from the Old Farmer's Almanac. It says, quote, "The moon was new. The day's verse from the old farmer was, see last sun, harvest's nigh done." That's on page 459. And I always took that to mean human harvest. Like, the vampires are harvesting humans. So it's kind of a creepy little thought. That's what I always took from that. So on page 460, it says, quote, "No one pronounced Jerusalem's lot dead on the morning of October 6th. No one knew it was. Like the bodies of previous days, it retained every semblance of life." End quote. So we find out that Susan is visiting her mom and siphoning blood off of her. Lots of random people are kind of under the radar missing. Like, people are aware that people are missing, but they're not overly concerned. Like Larry Crockett, his daughter, he hasn't seen her, but he assumes that she just got up and went to school, that kind of thing. Or people feel sick, they feel run down and tired, and they just don't want to mess with looking for other people. So Mark meets Ben, and he tells him about Susan and about Stryker. And Ben is very upset by this. He takes Mark over to Matt's hospital room, and that's when we get the, I would say, the core group of vampire hunters: Ben, Matt, Mark, and Jimmy. So they discuss preparations that Stryker made for Barlow's arrival, because Matt has been, like, kind of researching everything and trying to figure out vampire lore and all that stuff. So killing and sacrificing Ralphie Glick was the beginning, and bleeding out Danny. And then the very first preparation was killing Doc, that Cocker Spaniel dog, because he had white patches over his eyes. And apparently a way to scare vampires away was to get a black dog and paint little white spots over his eyes. So that dog already had it naturally. Stryker must have run across the dog and then killed it, because why take chances? Father Callahan hears the confessions of all of them. They grab holy water, they buy a ton of garlic, and they attempt to buy white roses, which Stryker has already purchased all of them in town. And they go onward to the Marsden house, where they find Stryker hanging upside down. His throat has been ravaged, and he's been bled white. And in the cellar, Barlow has left them a letter. A whole bunch of mean things in there. He also said that he left a present for Ben. The present that Barlow has for Ben is Susan. And this scene is very, very bloody, very emotional, and Ben is traumatized. He is the person who is supposed to stake Susan because they had had sexual relations, and he must treat her as though they were married, and he is the wronged party, and it's up to him. And just some of the description in it is heart-wrenching. In the letter that Barlow left, he threatened Mark's parents. So Jimmy and Ben go back to Matt's hospital room. Mark and Father Callahan go to the Petrie's house and try to warn them about the vampires. And they do not believe. So in the middle of trying to get them to go meet the others at the hospital, Barlow enters the house, which, again, does he not need an invitation? Is he, being the supreme alpha vampire, does he just get to come and go as he pleases? Or is that a continuity error? I'm not sure. But he faces off with Father Callahan after, oh sorry, he's killed Mark's parents. And in the movie, it's quite an interesting scene. We'll get to that in my review of the movie. So Father Callahan is facing off with Barlow, and Mark escapes. Father Callahan says, you know, get away, run away. Barlow invites the priest to throw away his crucifix and to just face him mano a mano, and Father Callahan doesn't. He's thinking, like, should I do this? If I don't do it, is that saying something about my faith? Is that putting me at a disadvantage? Etc., etc. And as he's thinking all this, Barlow approaches him and takes the crucifix from him, breaks the arms of the cross, and throws it on the ground. And he has lost. He has lost everything. And Barlow slices his own throat to produce gushing blood, and he holds Father Callahan against his throat, suffocating him until Father Callahan drinks. So he doesn't turn into a vampire, but he is marked and mentally tormented. As Callahan is walking toward his church in the middle of the night after this incident, quote, "No vampires would touch him, others perhaps, but not him. The master had marked him, and he would walk free until the master claimed his own." That's on page 534. So when Father Callahan tries to seek solace in his church, he tries to open the doors, and a kind of like a lightning charge happens, and he is zapped, and his hand is burned, and he is denied access to his church. He is unclean, impure. He is screwed. So he decides to go leave town. Matt says something that really always stuck with me. Quote, "There is every possibility that some of us, or all of us, may live and triumph only to stand trial for murder." A thing that I really like in the book that I really wish had been in the movie was Charlie Rhodes, the kind of cranky, mean bus driver. He is awakened from a deep slumber by his bus horn being blared, and he goes out really mad. He's certain that it's the kids misbehaving and he's going to teach them a lesson, and I think he grabs a tennis racket and he gets on the bus, and then the kid who's in the driver's seat pulls the door shut, and he finds that there are a whole bunch of vampire children on the bus, which would have been an amazing scene. Danny Glick is even in there, and it's said that he doesn't even ride the bus, and he has been dead for weeks. So the order of business is to make steaks at the Petrie house using the lathe, and Jimmy and Ben are kind of realizing the phenomenal job that they have undertaken. And Jimmy says to Ben, quote, "It's going to be weeks before we get them all, if we ever do. Can you stand that? Can you stand doing what you did to Susan 1,000 times?" That's on page 568. And that's a really good point, because if they have to continuously kill vampires and worry about getting caught doing it, and worry about, you know, just the bloodiness, the toll it takes on your mental faculties, just all that stuff is very inundating, and I could see why people would just quit and leave. That's in fact what Constable Gillespie does. He just decides he is finished. It's not worth it to him. He's taken off. He is not going to stay around. So Matt dies in the hospital. Jimmy and Mark go exploring and looking for vampires while Ben makes steaks, and Jimmy and Mark are going to map out where people are, where they're hiding, so that they can easily go back and find them again. They piece together that the vampires are kind of nesting at Eva's boarding house, and that's where Barlow is being kept. So they go to Eva's house, her boarding house, and the cellar light is broken. It doesn't work. and Jimmy kind of heads down to explore. Quote, "There was a rattling noise followed by a heavy thump. The cellar door stood open and the screams began." It's on page 583. So there was a trap, and I love, they kind of used the imagery in the movie, but not to great effect and not to this effect. They changed it quite a bit. But what it was is the vampires sawed off the stairs of the cellar after like the second step, and they moved them away. They left the rail going down a little bit further to give an illusion that there were full stairs in the dark, and they took all the kitchen knives. They stuck them through pieces of plywood and then removed the handles. And then they left the knives positioned upward on the cellar floor so that someone would walk down the stairs, fall, and then land on the knives. That is how Jimmy dies. He gets impaled with a whole bunch of knives and he bleeds out. And Mark, he fashions a wooden beam so that he can climb out of the cellar. So he runs into Ben, who's on his way back to town. They go back to the boarding house, into the cellar. They drag the coffin out from the root cellar, and scattered all about are vampire bodies. So it's like a little vampire nest, and Barlow's at the center in his coffin. So they haul the coffin out into the cellar proper and open up the coffin. Mark looks at Barlow, which he had earlier said don't look in his eyes, but he looked in the eyes, and he is overcome with this mad desire to stop Ben, to kill Ben, to protect Barlow. So Ben is trying to stake Barlow, but also trying to fight Mark, you know, and he ends up fighting Mark off, and then he has several things go wrong. He drops a stake. He realizes he left the hammer over by the lock on the root cellar door, so he has to go and retrieve the hammer. And so anyway, he finally climbs into the coffin and starts hammering the stake into Barlow, and he like pins him down by the legs. So he is finally staked. The other vampires wake up and are kind of lost. Like, why did you kill our master? What's going on? How dare you? They're in shock. So Mark and Ben escape, and they leave Salem's Lot. So that's the end of that. So now we are on chapter 15, Ben and Mark. Ben and Mark check into a motel outside of town, and the next day Ben returns to Salem's Lot. He goes to the boarding house, goes into his room, he burns his manuscript, and then he takes that snow globe that he took from the Marsden house and he throws it against the wall, and he leaves. He grabs Jimmy's body from the cellar, and he looks in the coffin and sees that there is the stake and then Barlow's teeth, and that's it. He picks the teeth up and they start moving. It's really creepy. And so he like freaks out and drops them. So Ben single-handedly buries Jimmy and Mark's parents. And then as he is ready to leave town, quote, "The town was dead. All at once he knew it for sure and true, just as he had known for sure that Miranda was dead when he had seen her shoe lying in the road. He began to cry." On page 619, and then he leaves Salem's Lot, and that's the point where he takes Mark and they just go to Mexico, well, stopping at places along the way. Then we have the epilogue. We get little excerpts from Ben's scrapbook that he's been keeping, and it's filled with newspaper clippings about Salem's Lot, and it's just full of people hearing odd noises, people worried about ghosts, people seeing faces in windows, mysterious deaths, disappearances, rumors of wild dog packs, etc. All this in Salem's Lot. So on the 6th of October, Ben and Mark are returning to Salem's Lot. They have decided it's time. The heat index is really high, there's a breeze, and the conditions are kind of right for a recreation, if you will, of the Great Fire of 1951. So they go through the deserted, kind of run-down, overgrown town. Like, there's weeds springing up, there's just no one around. there are signs that are faded and just really creepy. So they go up near the Marsden house, and they're in the woods, and Ben flicks a lit cigarette into a pile of brittle leaves, and there's a gentle breeze that starts a fire, and they watch it for a little bit and then they leave. And the idea is they're going to use that fire to drive all of the vampires out of their hiding places, and then they're going to go hunt them down. And that is Salem's Lot. It really is my favorite Stephen King book. I think all of the characters have so much depth, and I'm always so interested to read about them. I love the just immersion into the town life, and you get all these secondary characters that have very little to do with the actual book, but they are as much a part of the town as anything else, and it gives it a sense of being genuine, and I love that. It's very important, I think, because the town is also a character in this. So is the house, the Marsden house. I feel like that's a character in this book, not just a setting. So I very much enjoy this book and highly recommend. I have a tendency to reread it every fall. To me, probably because it takes place in the fall, it's like a Labor Day type book that I'll read, or late October kind of thing. And I probably won't read it again next year because I'll be in the midst of this Stephen King project, but I highly recommend it. Next step will be reviewing the miniseries, so I will have that up next week. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week. Have a spooky day.